family, there are moments when God doesn't just bless you, He begins to prune you. And pruning doesn't always feel like a miracle. Sometimes it feels like a breakup, a silence, a shift, or a goodbye you didn't see coming. But it's still His mercy. You've been praying for clarity, for peace, for elevation. But hear me, there are some people connected to you right now who cannot go with you into what's next. And God, in His love, is about to remove them. Not to punish you, but to protect you. Because what's coming requires pure connections, clean environments, and relationships that reflect your destiny, not your history. This is not the time to chase after what God is trying to subtract. This is not the time to question the exit. This is the time to discern the blessing behind the distance. Because before this month ends, God is going to make room. And it may look like loss, but it will feel like freedom. Let's go deeper. Divine disconnection is often the first sign of answered prayer. We cry out to God for clarity, for peace, for breakthrough, for purpose. But we don't always realize that His response doesn't always look like an open door. It often looks like a closed one. It looks like silence from someone you were once close to. It looks like an unexpected betrayal, or an uncomfortable distance, or a relationship you depended on suddenly shifting without warning. And if you're not discerning, you'll confuse God's movement for the enemy's attack. You'll start binding what God is actually blessing. You'll start chasing what He's trying to remove. Because divine disconnection doesn't always feel like an answered prayer, but it is. It's a quiet intervention. It's God saying, you asked for my will. Now I'm removing what's not a part of it. Many times, before God adds anything new to your life, He subtracts what's no longer aligned. And the subtraction often comes without a full explanation. Because if God gave you all the details, you might stay out of comfort, you might cling to familiarity, you might choose history over destiny. So instead, He removes, not to hurt you, but to help you move forward. He breaks the tie. He interrupts the rhythm. He allows things to fall apart that were never built on Him in the first place. And in the moment, it feels painful. It feels personal. It feels like rejection. But in reality, it's protection. You've been praying for clarity, so God removes confusion. You've been praying for purpose, so God removes distraction. You've been praying for peace, so God removes the source of your inner chaos. And because that source came in the form of a person, you question the shift. You wrestle with the silence. But God sees what you cannot. He knows what's happening behind the scenes. He knows what's being spoken when you're not in the room. He knows who is draining your spirit while smiling in your face. And He loves you too much to let you stay connected to what's poisoning your future. Divine disconnection is not a rejection of who you are. It's a redirection of where you're going. It's God pulling you away from counterfeit connections that look right, but are laced with hidden agendas. It's His way of making sure that when He launches you into your next, you're not surrounded by voices that will sabotage the assignment. And sometimes God will allow discomfort to be the signal. You'll stop finding joy in what once fulfilled you. You'll start noticing the tension in conversations. You'll begin to feel out of place in circles where you used to feel at home. That's not just emotional drift. Is spiritual repositioning. In those moments, your job is not to force what's fading. Your job is to lean into the shift, to trust that God is doing something you may not understand yet, to trust that His plan includes your peace, that his love includes discipline, that his grace sometimes feels like grief, but it's grief with purpose. Because what God removes is not greater than what he's making room for. And if you let him do the separating, he'll do the elevating. If you stop clinging to who left, you'll begin to see who's been assigned. You see, divine disconnection is not just about protecting your heart, it's about preserving your oil. Your anointing cannot be mixed with confusion. Your calling cannot be watered down by relationships that only feed your comfort but not your character. And God knows that where he's taking you, access must be earned, not assumed. Everybody can go with you, not because they're bad, but because they're not built for where you're going. And if you continue to carry what God has called you to release, you'll delay your own progress. You'll stay tied to what's expired and miss what's divine. This is the season where God begins to make surgical cuts in your circle, not to punish, but to purify, not to leave you empty, but to make space for what's coming. And every time something or someone leaves, you must begin to ask God, what are you making room for? Because he never subtracts without the intention to add something greater. Sometimes peace shows up after the people disappear. Sometimes peace shows up after the pressure lifts. Sometimes clarity comes in the quiet left by the voices he silenced. And when that happens, don't run back to what's familiar. Stand in the newness and trust that God's hands are in the shift. The disconnection may feel sudden, but it's not random, it's orchestrated, it's strategic. It's heaven answering the prayers you forgot you prayed. It's God saying, I heard you when you said you wanted more. I heard you when you said, use me. I heard you when you said, align my life. And now I'm doing exactly that. You may not feel the blessing in the moment, but months from now, when the dust settles, you'll thank him. You'll thank him for every unanswered text, for every silent exit, for every no that felt like rejection, but was actually redirection. Because divine disconnection is often the doorway to destiny. And God is faithful to close what needs to be closed before he opens what's next. You asked for his will and now it's unfolding, not with fireworks, but with divine separation that protects, preserves, and prepares you for the greater that's already on the way. God removes to protect, not to punish. We often misinterpret divine separation as rejection, but in truth, it's a rescue mission. It's the loving Father stepping into your life and saying, I see what you don't. I know what you can. And because he is good, he doesn't wait until it breaks you. He steps in before it consumes you. Sometimes God's great expression of love is not what he gives, but what he takes away. Because some connections look healthy on the surface, but they are spiritually draining underneath. Some people are smiling in your face while planting seeds of doubt behind your back. Some environments appear supportive, but they subtly suppress your growth, clip your wings, and water down your boldness. And when God begins to remove, it's not to cause you pain, it's to preserve your purpose. You prayed for direction and he began closing doors. You asked for clarity and he began revealing hearts. You said, Lord, whatever is not from you, take it. And then he took what you weren't ready to release. That's not punishment, that's divine alignment. Because God loves you too much to let you build your future on broken foundations. He knows that some relationships are landmines waiting to detonate the moment you step into your next level. And rather than allowing the enemy to use those people to delay your assignment, God moves ahead of the attack and starts cleaning your space. The truth is, protection doesn't always come wrapped in comfort. Sometimes it comes in the form of distance. Sometimes it shows up as disappointment. Sometimes it walks in as silence. But if you only measure God's goodness by what he gives, you'll miss the grace that flows through what he removes. Because removal is a sign that heaven is fighting for you, clearing the path for what is pure, aligned, and fruitful. It's God stepping in and saying, you've settled long enough. You've tolerated long enough. You've poured into what I never told you to water. Now let me remove what's contaminating your oil, blocking your view, and distracting your focus. There are people who look supportive but are silently envious. People who clap when you win in public but feel threatened in private. People who attach to your light, not to celebrate it but to drain it. And God, in His mercy, will allow the mask to fall. He will allow friction to expose intentions. He will allow the uncomfortable to lead you to clarity, because He would rather you endure temporary confusion than long-term compromise. He would rather you feel the sting of separation now than the pain of regret later. God is not trying to hurt you. He's trying to preserve what He placed inside of you. There are places you're called to go that require full access to your emotional, spiritual, and mental energy. And if your strength is constantly being drained by people who don't honor your presence, your discernment becomes dull, your passion starts to fade, your boldness begins to shrink, and the enemy knows he can't stop you outright, so he sends people to slow you down subtly. But God always sees it first. He sees the hidden motives. He sees the manipulation dressed up as loyalty. He sees the slow erosion of your confidence, your peace, and your boundaries. And when you won't walk away, He will remove what your heart has grown attached to, but your spirit can no longer carry. You don't need to understand the full reason to trust His hand. You don't need every answer to obey the flow. God doesn't always give explanations. He gives instructions. He nudges you when it's time to step back. He prompts you when it's time to release. And even if your emotions don't agree yet, your obedience will unlock peace on the other side. Some of the most powerful seasons of clarity come after obedience to uncomfortable removals. Because when God removes, He also restores. He never takes without the intention to multiply. He never subtracts without preparing to add. But the protection has to come first. Protection means covering you from unseen danger. Protection means keeping your spirit light enough to soar. Protection means surrounding your destiny with people who will nurture it, not manipulate it. And in order to do that, God must first remove what's out of place. You may feel the absence, but you will also feel the release. You'll notice the air is lighter. The confusion is gone. The inner wrestling has stopped. Because sometimes peace doesn't show up as a presence. It shows up when certain people leave. This is not about cutting people off in pride. It's about releasing people in obedience. It's about trusting that God knows what your next level requires. It's about letting Him do the pruning so that you can bear more fruit. The wrong people in the right season can still delay divine timing, and you don't have time to waste. Your assignment is too important. Your calling is too weighty. Your peace is too valuable. So if God begins to shift your circle, don't panic, praise. Don't chase, trust. Because what He removes is never greater than what He's protecting you from. And in time, you'll see that His no was your safeguard. His silence was your shield. His removal was your release into the freedom and clarity you've been praying for all along. You can't carry dead weight into a living season. When God is ushering you into something new, there are things, people, and mindsets that can no longer go with you. Not because they're inherently evil, but because they've expired. Their assignment in your life has reached its conclusion. And holding on to them any longer becomes disobedience in disguise. You prayed for promotion, for purpose, for open doors, for divine acceleration. but you're still trying to drag along dead weight that's silently slowing you down. That weight could be a relationship that once served you but now confuses you. A friendship that once sharpened you but now drains you. A connection that once aligned with your calling but now competes with it. And the longer you carry what no longer has breath, the more delayed your next breath becomes. There is a divine urgency on your life. You've crossed into a season where God is activating what He placed inside you long ago. And it's time to travel light. It's time to move freely. It's time to release anything that cannot grow with you. Anything that constantly pulls you back into cycles, God has already broken. Dead weight doesn't always show up as pain. Sometimes it shows up as comfort. It's the comfort of what's familiar, the ease of what's predictable, the illusion of loyalty that keeps you tied to something that hasn't fed your purpose in years. But just because something is comfortable doesn't mean it's called. Just because it feels familiar doesn't mean it's fruitful. And God is not building your future on comfort. He's building it on obedience. Dead weight makes you question your identity. It clouds your discernment. It convinces you to settle for what's available instead of what's anointed. It whispers things like, "You're doing too much. You've changed. Why can't you go back to the way you used to be?" But the truth is, you have changed. You're evolving. You're growing. You're becoming, and the very thing God is growing you into is the same thing that threatens the comfort of the people who like the old version of you, the one who didn't have boundaries, who didn't know their worth, who kept shrinking to keep the peace. But this living season requires your full strength, your full voice, your full presence, and anything that keeps you in a version of yourself God has outgrown is weight you can no longer afford to carry. Even Jesus refused to be weighed down by what wasn't aligned. When He walked into certain places and was dishonored, He left. When people weren't ready to receive Him, He didn't argue. He moved forward. He understood that His assignment wasn't to convince everyone. It was to obey the Father. And the same applies to you. Your job isn't to carry people who don't want to grow. Your job isn't to convince people to honor what they're committed to mishandling. Your job is to be faithful. And sometimes faithfulness looks like letting go. There's a divine momentum connected to your next move, but dead weight slows down movement. It forces you to manage what God has already marked as complete. And when you continue to carry what God is calling you to release, you not only delay your own progress, you also begin to dishonor the space God reserved for something new. The space that's meant to be filled with joy, with clarity, with divine connections is now occupied by confusion and compromise. And God, in His mercy, will begin to shake things loose. Not because He's trying to hurt you, but because He's trying to heal you from everything that's quietly hindering your advancement. You were never called to carry what keeps you spiritually stagnant. And if you don't make the decision to release the weight, you'll miss the window. Because this season requires agility. It requires sensitivity. It requires clarity of vision. Dead weight fogs all of that. It keeps you second guessing decisions God already confirmed. It makes you seek validation from people who never had the authority to affirm your calling in the first place. And the longer you carry what's dead, the heavier you become, until you start blaming God for the exhaustion that came from your refusal to let go. This is a living season. God is breathing new life into your calling, into your mind, into your surroundings. But resurrection and decay cannot coexist. You can't carry what's expired into what's fresh. And if you want to truly embrace the fullness of what God has for you before this month ends, you must make the bold decision to drop the weight, to release the familiar voices that keep tethering you to the past, to stop making space for what consistently drains your momentum, to stop accommodating what no longer aligns with your anointing. God didn't bring you this far to watch you settle under the pressure of unsigned people and expired places. He brought you here to show you that obedience unlocks overflow. That release is the prerequisite for revival. That when you let go of the dead weight, you finally have room to breathe again, to move again. And everything that's been waiting for your yes will begin to manifest, not because you earned it, but because you finally made space for it by laying down what was never meant to be carried into this new place. This is your moment to move, to shed, to surrender. Because living seasons don't wait for you to feel ready. They wait for you to release the weight. When access shifts, alignment is being restored. Sometimes the first indicator that God is doing something behind the scenes is not a new opportunity, it's a closed door. It's when someone you used to talk to every day suddenly becomes distant. It's when a circle that once felt like home now feels foreign. It's when people who once affirmed you begin to criticize the very things they used to celebrate. And if you don't understand spiritual alignment, you'll begin to panic. You'll question yourself. You'll try to fix what God is allowing to fade. But access is often God's first tool for divine alignment. Because who has access to you shapes what has access to your spirit. And when God is shifting you into purpose, He begins to manage your atmosphere by adjusting your access. Every elevation requires a new environment, and sometimes that environment is less about location and more about connection. It's the people who speak into your decisions, the ones who feed your focus, the ones who either build your faith or constantly challenge your worth. And when the people around you are no longer aligned with what God is building in you, He will begin to stir a shift. Not to embarrass you, but to prepare you. Not to isolate you, but to protect what's being cultivated. And too much access in the wrong season can kill what God just started. We often cry out for divine acceleration, not realizing that acceleration comes with adjustment. God doesn't just speed up the process, He refines the pathway. He removes distractions, prunes connections, exposes hidden intentions, and rearranges what's familiar to make room for what's fruitful. And in that process, access changes. People who once had a front row seat now move to the balcony. Some exit completely. Others lose the privilege of influence. And that's not shade, that's stewardship. Because when God starts restoring alignment, He does it with precision. He begins to place the right people in position and shift the wrong ones out. Not because they're evil, but because they're no longer assigned to your next. When access is adjusted, your clarity increases. You stop second guessing what you know God said. You begin to walk in authority again. You start recognizing the sound of the Spirit without needing constant confirmation, because confusion often lives in crowded spaces. And when God reduces your circle, it's to increase your sensitivity. You begin to hear what you couldn't hear when your soul was constantly managing voices that had no business being that close. Some people were never supposed to speak into your life. They were only supposed to pass through. But because access wasn't managed, influence was given too soon. And now God is stepping in to reset the flow. This is where trust becomes essential. Because the shifting of access doesn't always come with explanations. People change, conversations stop, invitations dry up. And if you're not rooted, you'll start thinking something's wrong with you. But what's really happening is that heaven is cleaning the stage for what's coming next. You are not being abandoned. You're being aligned. You are not being rejected. You are being repositioned. And every person who walks away, every door that closes, every connection that dissolves is part of the divine edit God is making in your story. Access is sacred. Jesus gave us the blueprint. He ministered to many, but trusted a few. He healed crowds, but only wept in front of a handful. He knew the difference between those who were assigned to his miracles and those who were assigned to his mission. And because he protected his inner circle, he was able to walk with focus. He was never swayed by public opinion because his private access points were guarded. And in this next season of your life, that level of discernment will be necessary. You can no longer afford to be available to what drains you. You can no longer keep spiritual leeches in spaces meant for covenant voices. You can no longer hand out VIP access to people who have not honored the value of your presence. When God restores alignment, he's not being cruel. He's being intentional. Because you've outgrown certain patterns. You've outgrown surface level friendships. You've outgrown circles that require you to shrink. And now heaven is responding. The shifting is uncomfortable, but it's necessary because what's ahead of you demands focus. It demands a new level of agreement, and agreement begins with atmosphere. So when you notice access changing, don't rush to repair. Pause and discern. Don't run after what's backing away. Run toward what's coming into alignment. Because when God restores alignment, he sets you up for momentum. He places you in environments that speak to your purpose, not just your pain. He surrounds you with people who can hold the weight of your calling, not just benefit from your kindness. This is the season where access becomes intentional, where alignment becomes visible, and where your peace becomes non-negotiable. If God is shifting who gets close, it's because he's serious about what's coming next. He's pruning not just your outer world, but your inner circle. Because your next level requires more than talent, it requires alignment. And alignment begins with the people who have access to your ears, your energy, and your emotion. When access shifts, pay attention. That's the signal that heaven is near, that purpose is awakening, and that God is restoring divine order to every corner of your life.